The Henderson divorce mediation had stretched into its fourth hour when Margaret Henderson finally broke down sobbing. Ava Sinclair passed the tissue box across the polished mahogany table, maintaining her practiced expression of calm concern, while internally calculating how much longer this particular battlefield would require her attention. "I just don't understand why he needs the vacation home," Margaret whispered, clutching the tissues. "We bought it together. We restored it together. Our children took their first steps on those hardwood floors." Across the table, Richard Henderson's attorney shuffled papers with deliberate indifference. "My client has provided numerous alternative arrangements," he stated. "The financial settlement is more than generous. Before we jump back, and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Ava had seen this pattern countless times over her 8 years as a family law mediator. The emotional spouse, the calculating spouse, the lawyers who treated human heartbreak like a commodity to be divided and distributed. She'd built her reputation on neutrality, on finding the thin line between legal precision and human compassion. "Richard," Ava said, turning to address the husband directly, "help me understand your attachment to the property. Margaret has expressed that the home holds significant sentimental value related to your children's early years." Richard's jaw tightened. "Sentimental value doesn't pay property taxes, Miss Sinclair. I've been carrying the financial burden of that house for 3 years while Margaret pursued her art therapy certification." "Art therapy that you encouraged," Margaret shot back, her voice rising. "You said my happiness mattered more than money." Ava watched the familiar dance of accusation and defense, the way couples who'd once shared everything now weaponized their intimate knowledge of each other's vulnerabilities. She'd learned to read the subtle signs, the way Richard's fingers drummed against his thigh when he was preparing to lie, the way Margaret's breathing quickened when she felt cornered. "Let's take a 15-minute break," Ava suggested, her voice carrying the gentle authority that had made her one of Boston's most sought-after mediators. "Sometimes clarity comes with a little distance." As the room emptied, Ava remained seated, reviewing her notes. The Henderson case would resolve itself within the next session. Richard would keep the vacation home but pay Margaret an additional settlement to compensate for its sentimental value. Margaret would realize that money, while not sentiment, provided security. Both would walk away feeling they'd won something, even as they'd lost everything that had once mattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from Graham. "How's the session going?" "Made dinner reservations at Mistral for 7. Ava smiled, typing back. "Wrapping up soon. Can't wait to see you." After 6 years of marriage, Graham Carrington still surprised her with thoughtful gestures. Dinner at Mistral on a Wednesday evening. Her favorite table overlooking the harbor. The server who knew to bring her the wine list because Graham always insisted she choose. The mediation resumed and concluded exactly as Ava had predicted. Margaret signed the agreements with shaking hands, Richard with brisk efficiency. Both thanked Ava for her patience and professionalism. She'd guided them through the dissolution of their 14-year marriage with the same careful attention she'd give to any complex negotiation. "Another successful resolution," she murmured to herself, gathering her materials. Yet as she locked her office and walked to her car, Ava couldn't shake the familiar melancholy that accompanied these victories. She'd become an expert at dismantling the architecture of love, at finding equitable ways to divide what had once been indivisible. The drive home to Beacon Hill took 20 minutes through Boston's early evening traffic. Ava used the time to transition from mediator to wife, shedding the professional armor that protected her from absorbing too much of her client's pain. By the time she pulled into the private garage beneath their brownstone, she'd mentally catalogued the day's small victories: the Henderson settlement, a potential new client referral, the article she'd been invited to write for the Massachusetts Bar Association Journal. Graham's Tesla was already in the garage, which meant he'd come home early from his tech firm. Ava climbed the stairs to their renovated brownstone, inhaling the familiar scent of the eucalyptus candles Graham insisted on burning. The house was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the built-in speakers. "You're home," Graham called from the kitchen, his voice carrying that warm undertone that had first attracted her at a mutual friend's fundraiser 6 years ago. "Perfect timing. I was just about to open wine." Ava found him at the Granite Island, still wearing his tailored work shirt but with sleeves rolled up, his dark hair slightly disheveled in the way that made him look younger than his 38 years. He'd arranged takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant on the Good China, dimmed the lights, and poured her preferred Pinot Grigio. "This looks wonderful," she said, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion? To celebrate my brilliant wife?" Graham grinned, pulling out her chair. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you about something." Something in his tone made Ava pause as she settled into her seat. In 6 years of marriage, she'd learned to read Graham's moods with the same precision she applied to her clients. Tonight, beneath his casual charm, she sensed a careful rehearsal. "Good news, I hope," she said, sampling the pad thai he'd ordered. For her, Graham swirled his wine, watching the golden liquid catch the light. "I've been thinking about us, about our future, about what we both want from life." "That sounds very philosophical for a Wednesday evening, Ava." He set down his glass, his expression shifting to something more serious. "I think we should get divorced." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ava felt her professional instincts activate the same emotional distancing that allowed her to navigate her clients' most volatile moments. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "That's quite a statement, Graham. Where is this coming from?" He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "It's not coming from anger or disappointment. We're both too mature for that kind of drama. I've just been doing some soul searching, and I think we've grown into different people than we were when we married." Ava studied his face, noting the practiced sincerity, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Different how?" "You're so focused on your career, on helping other people solve their problems. I'm building something revolutionary in the crypto space. We barely see each other anymore. When we do, we're both exhausted. That's called marriage, Graham. That's called building a life together. But are we building it together?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Or are we just living parallel lives in the same house?" The question stung because it contained enough truth to sound reasonable. Ava had thrown herself into her mediation practice over the past 2 years, building a reputation that had attracted increasingly high-profile clients. Graham had been equally consumed with his startup, Cryptoval, working late nights and weekend conferences. They'd celebrated their successes separately more often than together. "So your solution is divorce?" she said carefully. "My solution is honesty. We're both too smart to stay in a marriage that's become a habit instead of a choice." Graham's voice carried the same confidence he used when presenting to investors. "I want this to be clean, Ava. Amicable. We'll divide our assets fairly. Sell the house, move on with our lives while we still respect each other." Ava noticed he'd already thought through the logistics. "You've given this considerable thought." "I have. And I think you have too, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet." She hadn't, but she found herself considering his words. The mediation sessions that had become her refuge from an increasingly distant marriage. The evenings when Graham's absence felt more comfortable than his presence. The way they'd stop talking about children, about travel plans, about anything that required a shared future. "What kind of timeline are you thinking?" she asked, her mediator's mind automatically organizing the practical considerations. "I'd like to move forward quickly. No point in dragging this out." Graham's relief was palpable. "I've already consulted with Richard Hawthorne about representation. He says with our assets and no children, we could be finalized within 6 months." The mention of Richard Hawthorne, one of Boston's most expensive divorce attorneys, sent a chill through Ava's professional instincts. Graham had researched lawyers before having this conversation with her. He'd planned this moment, choreographed it down to the Thai food and wine. 6 months, she repeated. "I know it seems fast, but why prolong the inevitable? We're both rational people. We can handle this better than most couples." Ava nodded slowly, buying time to process the emotional earthquake that was reshaping her understanding of the past 6 years. "I suppose we can. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this," Graham said, his posture relaxing. "I was worried you might make things complicated." "Complicated how?" "Some people turn divorce into warfare. But you're too professional for that. You understand that the goal is resolution, not revenge." The phrase struck her as oddly specific, as if he'd practiced it. Ava had heard similar language from dozens of clients, usually the ones who'd already hidden assets or prepared for battle while their spouses remained unaware. "Of course," she said. "Resolution is always the goal." They finished dinner with careful conversation about logistics. Graham suggested they each hire separate attorneys to avoid conflicts of interest. He offered to move out temporarily to give her space to process He mentioned a settlement figure that seemed generous until Ava realized it represented a fraction of what she knew their combined assets to be worth. I should probably call Noel, Ava said as they cleared the dishes together. Get some informal advice about the process. Good idea. Though I hope you won't let this become too much of a female bonding session. You know how these things can escalate when friends get involved. Another carefully casual comment that felt like a warning. Ava smiled and agreed, filing the observation away with all the other small inconsistencies that her professional instincts had begun cataloging. That night, as Graham slept beside her with the peaceful expression of a man who'd successfully completed a difficult negotiation, Ava stared at the ceiling and wondered how long he'd been planning this conversation. The Thai food, the wine, the carefully rehearsed explanations, all of it designed to make her feel like a collaborator in her own dismissal. She thought about Margaret Henderson, sobbing over the loss of a vacation home that had contained her children's first steps. She thought about Richard Henderson, drumming his fingers against his thigh as he prepared to lie about his attachments. She thought about the subtle signs she'd learned to read, the patterns of behavior that revealed a person's true intentions. Graham's breathing was steady and deep beside her, the sleep of someone whose conscience was clear. But Ava's mind was racing, cataloging questions that needed answers before she signed anything or agreed to any timelines. In the morning, she would call Noel Vargas, her best friend and one of the most skilled forensic accountants in New England. She would frame it as a request for informal advice, just as she'd told Graham. But she would also ask Noel to look into something that had been nagging at her professional instincts: the discrepancy between the settlement figure Graham had mentioned and the lifestyle they'd been living. For now, though, she lay in the darkness and wondered if this was how all her clients felt in those first moments after their world shifted, simultaneously shocked and strangely unsurprised. As if they'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop without realizing they'd been listening for it. Noel Vargas arrived at Ava's office the next morning carrying 2 cups of coffee and the wary expression of someone who'd received an unusual request. At 36, Noel had built a reputation as one of Boston's most thorough forensic accountants, specializing in high-net-worth divorces where assets had a tendency to develop legs and walk away. So, Noel said, settling into the chair across from Ava's desk, your husband wants a divorce, and you need informal advice about financial disclosure. That's the official story. That's the true story, Ava replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. What makes you think there's more to it? Because I've known you for 15 years, and you've never needed advice about divorce law. You could mediate your own divorce in your sleep. Noel's dark eyes were sharp with concern. Plus, you sounded strange on the phone. Too careful. Ava had met Noel during their first year at Boston University Law School, where Noel had been pursuing a joint GD or MBA before deciding that numbers told better stories than legal arguments. Their friendship had survived law school, career changes, relationships, and the particular challenges of being successful women in male-dominated fields. He mentioned a settlement figure, Ava said carefully, $2 million, plus my keeping. The practice, of course. Noel's eyebrows rose. And that sounds low to you? It sounds like a number someone would offer if they wanted to avoid a detailed financial disclosure, or if they were hiding assets. Noel leaned forward. What do you know about Graham's business? CryptoVault. He developed some kind of cryptocurrency trading platform. It's been doing well, but I've never seen detailed financials, never seen them, or never asked to see them. Ava paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips. I trusted him. Of course you did. He's your husband. Noel's voice carried no judgment, only the practical sympathy of someone who'd helped unravel hundreds of financial deceptions. But trust and verification are different things. What else do you know about his business practices? He travels frequently for conferences. He's always networking with investors. He bought that Tesla last year, upgraded his office space, started talking about expanding internationally, all of which costs money. Sometimes more money than a startup should have. Noel pulled out her phone and began typing. I'm going to need you to think about this differently, Ava. Not as a wife who's been asked for a divorce, but as a mediator who's been presented with a settlement that doesn't match the lifestyle evidence. The reframing was exactly what Ava's professional instincts had been trying to tell her. She'd spent years teaching clients to look beyond emotional reactions to financial realities. Graham's $2 million offer wasn't generous. It was a lowball bid designed to conclude negotiations quickly. What would you need to get a clearer picture? Ava asked. Access to financial records, bank statements, tax returns, business filings. Has he ever asked you to sign anything related to his business? Ava's memory snagged on something she'd forgotten. Last year, some kind of tax document. He said it was routine, that married couples needed to file jointly for certain business expenses. Do you remember what the document was called? No, but I might have a copy in my files at home. Noelle's expression grew more serious. Ava, I need you to understand something. If Graham is hiding assets, it's not just about the money. It's about the fact that he's been lying to you for however long this has been going on. People don't suddenly develop the skills to hide millions of dollars. This would be a pattern of behavior. The words hit Ava like a physical blow. She'd built her career on helping people navigate the aftermath of betrayal, but she'd never considered that her own marriage might be built on deception. How do we find out? She asked, very carefully. If he's sophisticated enough to hide assets, he's probably sophisticated enough to know if someone's looking for them. Noelle finished her coffee and set the cup aside. I'll start with public records, business filings, property transfers, anything that's available without triggering alerts. But I'll need you to be normal around him. Don't change your routine. Don't ask questions about his business. Don't give him any reason to think you're suspicious. I can do that, can you? Because this is going to be harder than you think. Every conversation you have with him from now on is going to feel like a performance. You're going to start noticing things you've been ignoring. You're going to realize that maybe you've been married to a stranger. Ava thought about the previous evening's conversation, about Graham's careful rehearsal of reasonable explanations. I think I already am. Over the following weeks, Ava maintained the performance of a wife adjusting to unexpected divorce proceedings. She met with a divorce attorney. Graham had recommended a competent but an imaginative practitioner who specialized in quick, clean settlements. She participated in discussions about dividing household items, about the logistics of selling their home, about the timeline for finalizing their separation. Meanwhile, Noelle worked through layers of financial records with the methodical patience of someone who'd learned to read the language of hidden money. She called Ava every few days with updates that painted an increasingly troubling picture. He's got at least 3 different business entities, Noelle reported during one of their coffee meetings. Cryptovault is just the public face. There's also something called CV Holdings and Carrington Digital Assets, all incorporated in Delaware, which makes the filings harder to trace. Is that unusual? Not necessarily. But it's unusual for someone to have multiple entities if they're not trying to compartmentalize different types of income or assets. Different types how? Legal and questionable, domestic and offshore, reported and unreported. Ava felt a familiar chill. You think he's evading taxes? I think he's evading something. The question is what, and how much? The answer began to emerge as Noelle traced the flow of money through Graham's various business accounts. Cryptocurrency transactions that appeared to be trades but followed patterns more consistent with money laundering. Payments to consulting firms that existed only on paper. Investment gains that were too consistent to be legitimate trading profits. This is sophisticated, Noelle said, spreading printouts across Ava's kitchen table one evening while Graham was at a conference in Miami. Whoever set this up understood both cryptocurrency markets and international banking regulations. Are you saying Graham didn't design this system himself? I'm saying he either has help, or he's much smarter about financial crime than he's ever let on. Ava studied the documents, trying to reconcile the man she'd married with the person who'd constructed such an elaborate deception. How much money are we talking about? Based on what I can trace through public records, at least $20 million, probably more. $20 million. Graham had offered her $2 million as a settlement for a marriage that had produced at least $20 million in assets. The calculation was so insulting that Ava felt her professional composure crack for the first time. He's stealing from me, she said quietly. He's stealing from everyone. The IRS, his investors, you. This isn't just marital deception, Ava. This is criminal fraud. That night, Ava lay awake thinking about the Margaret Henderson case, about the way Richard Henderson had drummed his fingers against his thigh when he was preparing to lie. She thought about her own husband, about the careful way he'd presented his request for divorce, about the settlement figure that had seemed generous until she understood what he was really worth. She thought about the 8 years she'd spent helping other people navigate the aftermath of betrayal, and how naive she'd been to think that her own marriage was immune to the same patterns of deception and manipulation. When Graham returned from Miami, he brought her a gift, a necklace from Tiffany that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was affectionate and attentive, asking about her work, commenting on how well she was handling their separation. "You're remarkable," he told her over dinner at another expensive restaurant. "Most women would be hysterical by now, but you're handling this with such grace." "I'm a professional," Ava replied, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "I understand that these things happen. Exactly. We're both too evolved for drama." As he spoke, Ava noticed the way his eyes shifted slightly to the left when he mentioned their mutual evolution. She catalogued the gesture the same way she'd catalogued Richard Henderson's finger drumming, filing it away as evidence of a man who'd learned to lie so smoothly that he'd convinced himself he was telling the truth. "I've been thinking about the timeline," she said carefully. 6 months. Does seem fast. Maybe we should take a little more time to make sure we're doing this right. Graham's smile flickered for just a moment. "I thought you wanted to move forward quickly." "I do, but I also want to be thorough. My practice depends on my reputation for being careful and precise, of course. Though I hope you're not overthinking this. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make with our hearts, not our heads." Another carefully crafted phrase that sounded meaningful but revealed nothing. Ava smiled and agreed, while mentally adding it to her growing list of conversational patterns that suggested Graham had been preparing for this divorce much longer than he'd admitted. The private investigator Ava hired was nothing like the fictional detectives she'd seen in movies. Marcus Chen was a former FBI forensic accountant who'd transitioned to private practice after burning out on federal bureaucracy. He worked from a modest office in Cambridge, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and spoke about surveillance and financial crime with the same clinical detachment Ava brought to her mediation sessions. "Your husband has been very careful," Marcus said, reviewing the materials Noel had compiled. "But careful people often develop patterns, and patterns can be traced." "What kind of patterns?" "He moves money every Tuesday. Always on Tuesday. Always between AM and noon. The amounts vary, but the timing is consistent. That suggests someone who's trying to maintain a routine that won't attract attention." "Where does the money go?" "Multiple destinations. Some to legitimate business accounts, some to shell companies, some to cryptocurrency wallets that bounce through several exchanges before landing in accounts I can't trace without federal subpoena power." Ava absorbed this information with the same professional calm she'd use with a particularly complex mediation case. "What about personal conduct?" "You mean, is he having an affair?" "I mean, is he doing anything that would support the narrative that our marriage deteriorated naturally?" Marcus consulted his notes. "He's been meeting regularly with a woman named Jessica Martinez. She's listed as a marketing consultant for CryptoVault, but their meetings happen at hotels, not offices." "How regularly?" "Twice a week for the past 6 months. Always the same hotel, always the same time slot." 6 months. The affair had been running parallel to Graham's planning for their divorce. Ava wondered if Jessica Martinez knew she was dating a married man, or if Graham had already told her he was separated. "What else?" "He's been moving personal assets. Art, jewelry, collectibles. All sold through private dealers, all converted to cash or cryptocurrency. The timing suggests he's been preparing for this divorce for at least a year. While Ava had been focused on building her practice, Graham had been systematically dismantling their marriage and preparing to walk away with as much wealth as possible. The calculation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Is there enough evidence to challenge his settlement offer? There's enough evidence to destroy his settlement offer, but there's also enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation into his business practices. Ava considered the implications. Exposing Graham's financial crimes would certainly give her leverage in their divorce, but it would also destroy him completely. The question was whether she wanted leverage or justice. "I need to think about this," she said. "Don't think too long." People who are this sophisticated about hiding assets are usually equally sophisticated about making them disappear permanently. That evening, Ava attended a networking event for family law practitioners, one of the regular professional gatherings that kept her connected to Boston's legal community. She was making small talk with a colleague when she noticed Judge Clarence Miles across the room. At 62, Judge Miles had presided over family court for nearly 20 years. He was known for his no-nonsense approach to high-conflict divorces, and his particular disdain for attorneys who treated the courtroom like a theater. Ava had appeared before him dozens of times and had always found him to be fair, if intimidating. "Judge Miles," she said, approaching him during a break in the evening's presentations, "I wanted to thank you for your comments about mediation during the Henderson case last month, Miss Sinclair. That was impressive work on your part." Both parties walked away feeling heard, which is more than most mediators accomplish. "I try to focus on resolution rather than victory, a rare approach these days. Too many practitioners treat divorce like a contact sport." Judge Miles studied her with the sharp attention he brought to his courtroom. "Are you enjoying the practice of mediation?" "I am, though I'm starting to appreciate how difficult it must be to navigate these cases as a party rather than a neutral facilitator." Speaking from experience, Ava hesitated, then decided that honesty might serve her better than discretion. "My husband recently asked for a divorce. It's given me a new perspective on what our clients experience." Judge Miles's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you mediating the case yourself?" "No, that would be inappropriate. We're working with separate attorneys to keep everything clean and professional." Clean and professional. Those are admirable goals. The judge's tone suggested he'd heard similar promises before. "Though in my experience, the people who most loudly proclaim their commitment to amicable resolution are often the ones preparing for war." The observation hit closer to home than Ava cared to admit. "Why do you think that is?" "Because divorce reveals character. Some people rise to the occasion, and some people reveal who they really are when they think no one's watching." "And which category do most people fall into?" Judge Miles smiled grimly. "I think you already know the answer to that question, Miss Sinclair." Later that evening, Ava sat in her home office reviewing the materials Marcus and Noel had compiled. The evidence of Graham's financial deception was overwhelming, but so was the evidence of his careful planning. He'd been preparing for this divorce for at least a year, possibly longer. Every conversation they'd had about their future, every decision they'd made about their finances, every moment of intimacy they'd shared, all of it had been contaminated by his secret agenda. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Sinclair, this is Harper Thomas. I work for CryptoVault. I think we need to talk." Ava's pulse quickened. "What about?" "I received some documents in the mail, anonymously. They show financial transactions that I think you should know about." The anonymous documents had been Noel's idea, a way to test whether anyone inside Graham's company might be willing to confirm what their investigation had revealed. Apparently, the strategy had worked. "I'd be happy to meet with you," Ava said carefully. "Though I should mention that I'm currently separated from my husband." "I know. That's why I'm calling. I think he's been lying to you about a lot of things." They arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop in Harvard Square, far from Graham's usual haunts. Harper Thomas turned out to be a nervous 26-year-old, with a MIT computer science degree and a moral compass that was apparently stronger than her job security. "I've been working on the cryptocurrency trading algorithms," Harper explained, clutching her coffee cup with both hands. "But some of the transactions don't look like legitimate trades. They look like money laundering." "What makes you say that?" "The patterns. Real trading generates profits and losses based on market conditions. But these transactions always generate profits, and they always follow the same mathematical progressions." "That's not how markets work." Ava pulled out a notebook, falling into the interviewing techniques she'd developed for complex mediations. "How long have you been noticing these patterns?" "About 6 months. I tried to ask Graham about them, but he said they were proprietary trading strategies that I wasn't cleared to discuss." "What changed your mind about keeping quiet?" Harper hesitated. "The anonymous documents you sent me. They showed transactions that I recognized from our internal systems. If someone outside the company can trace these patterns, it means we're all going to be in trouble when the authorities figure out what's really happening." "What do you think is really happening?" "Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "I think Graham is using our trading platform to launder money for himself and possibly other clients. I think he's been doing it for years. And I think he's planning to shut down the company and disappear with the profits." The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Graham's eagerness for a quick divorce, His offer of a settlement that represented a fraction of his actual wealth, his careful preparation for their separation, all of it made sense if he was planning to abandon not just their marriage but his entire public identity. "Are you willing to document what you've observed?" Ava asked. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to avoid going to prison for someone else's crimes." That night, Ava stood in her kitchen looking out at the Boston skyline, thinking about the choice that lay before her. She could accept Graham's settlement offer and walk away with $2 million and the painful knowledge that she'd been married to a criminal. Or she could use the evidence she'd gathered to expose his crimes and ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. The decision, she realized, wasn't really about money. It was about justice, about the difference between being a victim and being a survivor, about the kind of person she wanted to be when this was over. She thought about Judge Miles's words about divorce revealing character. She thought about Margaret Henderson, sobbing over a vacation home that represented her children's early memories. She thought about Richard Henderson, drumming his fingers against his thigh as he prepared to lie about his attachments. She thought about her own husband, sleeping peacefully upstairs while she stood in their kitchen planning his destruction. The choice, when it came down to it, was simple. Graham had underestimated her, had assumed that her professional commitment to resolution meant she was weak. He'd confused her desire for peace with an inability to fight. He was about to learn the difference. Ava picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for the one person who could help her turn evidence into justice. Judge Miles had been right about divorce revealing character. It was time to reveal hers. The motion Ava filed on a gray Tuesday morning in March appeared routine to anyone who didn't understand the subtle art of legal warfare. Titled Request for Comprehensive Asset Valuation and Extended Discovery Period, it contained 14 pages of carefully crafted language that would effectively freeze Graham's ability to move money while appearing to be nothing more than due diligence. "You're buying yourself time," said Patricia Morrison, the divorce attorney Ava had quietly retained after firing Graham's recommended counsel. Patricia was known for representing high net worth women whose husbands had underestimated their wives' resolve. "But time for what?" "Time to build a case that will stand up to federal scrutiny," Ava replied, reviewing the motion one final time before Patricia filed it. "Graham thinks he's dealing with a cooperative wife who wants a quick settlement. He has no idea what's coming." The beauty of the motion was its apparent reasonableness. Ava wasn't making accusations or demanding emergency hearings. She was simply asking the court to ensure that all marital assets were properly valued before division, a request that any competent attorney would make in a high-asset divorce. Graham's reaction, when it came, revealed more than he intended. "What the hell is this about?" he demanded, cornering Ava in their kitchen that evening. The motion papers crumpled in his fist. "We agreed to keep this simple. We agreed to be fair and thorough," Ava corrected, maintaining the calm tone she'd perfected over years of mediation. "A comprehensive valuation protects both of us. It's a delay tactic. My attorney says this could push our timeline back 6 months. Your attorney is probably right. These things take time when done properly." Graham's jaw tightened, and for a moment Ava saw past his carefully maintained charm to the calculating mind beneath. "I thought you wanted to move forward with our lives." "I do. But I also want to make sure we're both being completely honest about our assets." The word honest hung between them like an accusation. Graham's eyes narrowed slightly, and Ava realized he was trying to determine how much she might know or suspect. "Of course we're being honest," he said finally. "I've been completely transparent about my holdings. I'm sure you have. So a thorough valuation shouldn't be a problem." That night, Graham made several phone calls from his home office, his voice too low for Ava to overhear but his agitation clear from his pacing. She wondered if he was calling his attorney, his accountant, or Jessica Martinez. Perhaps all three. Meanwhile, Noelle was making progress on the forensic analysis that would support whatever legal strategy Ava decided to pursue. The pattern of Graham's financial deception was becoming clearer with each day of investigation. "He's been siphoning money out of joint accounts for 2 years," Noelle reported during one of their weekly coffee meetings. "Small amounts, usually transferred on the same day he made legitimate business deposits. Camouflaged to look like business. Expenses. How much total? Nearly $500,000 from accounts that should have been marital assets. But that's just the obvious stuff. The cryptocurrency transactions are where the real money is hidden." Ava absorbed this information. with the clinical detachment she'd learned to apply to her most difficult cases. What about Jessica Martinez? Interesting story there. She's not just his girlfriend, she's his business partner. Her marketing consulting firm has been receiving payments from CryptoVault, but she doesn't do any actual marketing work. The money goes into her account and then gets converted to cryptocurrency within 48 hours, so she's helping him launder money. Either that, or she's being used without knowing it. Though given the amounts involved, it's hard to believe she's completely innocent. That afternoon, Ava had lunch with Judge Miles at a restaurant near the courthouse. It wasn't unusual for attorneys and judges to socialize professionally, but Ava had a specific purpose in mind. How are you managing your own situation? Judge Miles asked after they'd ordered. It's been educational. I'm starting to understand why some of our clients become so paranoid during proceedings. Paranoid or realistic? I'm beginning to think there's less difference between those two things than I used to believe. Judge Miles studied her with the sharp attention he brought to his courtroom. Are you discovering that your situation is more complicated than it initially appeared? I'm discovering that people can be very different from who you think they are. That's one of the hardest lessons of family law. We want to believe that the people we love are fundamentally honest, but financial pressure can reveal aspects of character that we'd prefer not to acknowledge. Ava chose her next words carefully. What advice would you give to someone who discovered that their spouse had been systematically hiding assets? Legally or personally? Both? Judge Miles paused, considering. Legally, document everything and work with competent counsel to ensure full disclosure. Personally, he hesitated. Personally, I'd say that someone who's been planning financial deception for months or years is not someone who can be trusted to honor any agreement they make. Such a person should be treated as what they are, an opponent, not a partner. The conversation stayed with Ava as she returned to her office and found Harper Thomas waiting in the reception area. The young programmer looked even more nervous than she had during their first meeting. I think I'm in trouble, Harper said without preamble. Graham asked me to delete some files from our backup servers. Historical transaction data. Did you do it? I said I would, but I made copies first. I'm pretty sure what he's asking me to destroy is evidence of the money laundering. Ava felt a surge of adrenaline. Are you willing to preserve those files and testify about what you've observed? I'm willing to do whatever keeps me out of prison, but I'm scared. If Graham finds out I've been copying files, he won't find out from me. But you need to understand that if we move forward with this, there's no going back. Graham's business will be destroyed, and he'll likely face criminal charges. Harper was quiet for a long moment. He's been lying to investors too, promising returns that are only possible because of the laundering. When this collapses, a lot of people are going to lose their life savings. Then we need to make sure it collapses in a controlled way, with the evidence preserved for federal investigators. That evening, Ava sat in her home office working on a strategy that had evolved far beyond divorce proceedings. She was no longer just trying to secure a fair settlement, she was building a case that would expose years of financial crime and ensure that Graham faced the full consequences of his actions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Morrison. Graham's attorney filed a counter motion demanding immediate mediation. They want to resolve this within 30 days. Ava smiled grimly as she typed her reply. Absolutely not. We proceed with full discovery as planned. Graham was getting desperate, which meant he was starting to understand that he wasn't in control of the situation anymore. The careful, charming man who had requested an amicable divorce was beginning to crack under the pressure of having his timeline disrupted. Over the following weeks, the psychological warfare between them intensified. Graham alternated between charm and intimidation, trying to convince Ava to accept his original settlement offer while subtly threatening what might happen if she continued to complicate their divorce. You're making this much harder than it needs to be, he said one evening over dinner at yet another expensive restaurant. My attorney is billing us thousands of dollars to fight over assets that we could divide amicably. Your attorney is billing you, Ava corrected. I'm responsible for my own legal fees. Of course, but the principle stands. We're both intelligent people. We should be able to resolve this without turning it into a circus. I agree completely. Full financial disclosure should make everything much simpler. Graham's smile tightened. You know, Ava, I've always admired your dedication to your clients, but I'm starting to wonder if you're bringing too much professional paranoia to our personal situation. What do you mean? You're treating our divorce like you're mediating a case between strangers, looking for deception and hidden agendas where none exist. We're not your clients, we're two people who loved each other trying to end our marriage with dignity. The speech was carefully crafted, designed to make her feel guilty for not trusting him. But Ava had heard similar manipulation tactics from dozens of clients' spouses over the years. The appeal to their shared history, the suggestion that her professional instincts were somehow inappropriate in their personal relationship, the implication that she was being unreasonable by insisting on thorough disclosure. You're right, she said, watching relief flicker across his features. We should trust each other completely. That's why I'm sure you won't mind the comprehensive asset review. The relief vanished, replaced by something harder. Of course not. Though I hope you understand that some of my business information is confidential. I can't have proprietary trading strategies exposed to public record, naturally. I'm sure the court will provide appropriate protections for legitimate business secrets, naturally, Graham echoed, but his tone suggested he found nothing natural about the situation at all. Graham's counterattack came on a Monday morning in April, delivered through his attorney in the form of a motion accusing Ava of hiding assets and delaying proceedings in bad faith. The document was a masterpiece of projection, alleging that Ava had been secretly transferring money from joint accounts and using her mediation practice to shelter income. He's trying to muddy the waters, Patricia Morrison explained, reviewing the motion in her office. Classic misdirection. If he can make you look equally guilty of financial misconduct, it weakens your position and gives him leverage to push for a quick settlement. Can he prove any of these allegations? He doesn't need to prove them. He just needs to create enough doubt to make a judge question your motives for demanding extended discovery. Ava studied the motion, noting the careful way Graham's attorney had crafted accusations that sounded plausible without being provable. It was the work of someone who understood both family law and psychological manipulation. We respond by demonstrating exactly why I've been demanding full disclosure, Ava decided. If Graham wants to play this game, we'll show the court what we've discovered about his business practices. Are you sure you want to escalate? Once we put financial crimes on the record, this stops being a divorce case and becomes a federal matter. Ava thought about Harper Thomas, about the evidence of money laundering, about the investors who were being defrauded. She thought about Jessica Martinez, who might be an accomplice or another victim. She thought about her own naive assumption that Graham was fundamentally honest. He escalated when he decided to steal from me. I'm just responding appropriately. The response Patricia filed the following week was devastating in its precision. Without making direct accusations of criminal activity, it laid out a pattern of financial behavior that demanded explanation. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions that followed suspicious patterns, business entities with no apparent legitimate purpose, transfers of marital assets without disclosure. Graham's reaction was swift and revealing. Instead of addressing the financial questions, he shifted to personal attack. I can't believe you're doing this to us, he said, confronting Ava in their kitchen that evening with the controlled fury of someone whose careful plans were falling apart. We had an agreement, a clean, amicable divorce. Now you're dragging our private business through the courts like we're some kind of bitter enemies. We are enemies, Graham. We just haven't been honest about it until now. The words hung in the air between them, the first truly honest thing either of them had said since he'd requested the divorce. Graham's mask of reasonable concern slipped, for a moment, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You have no idea what you're playing with, he said quietly. There are people involved in my business who don't appreciate publicity. If you keep pushing this, you could be putting yourself in danger. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Some situations are more complicated than they appear. Ava met his gaze steadily. Then perhaps you should have considered those complications before you decided to steal from me. I haven't stolen anything from you. $20 million in hidden assets suggests otherwise. Graham's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise she'd seen from him in months. How did you? He stopped himself. But it was too late. How did I what, Graham? Discover your offshore accounts. Trace your money laundering operation. Figure out that Jessica Martinez isn't just your girlfriend but your business partner in financial fraud. His face went very still. You've been investigating me. I've been protecting myself. Just like you taught me when you started planning this divorce a year ago. A year ago? Now, he looked genuinely confused. Ava, you only decided what? To mention it to me? You've Been preparing for this divorce since you started siphoning money from our joint accounts 2 years ago. Since you incorporated those shell companies in Delaware. Since you started your affair with Jessica. Graham sank into a chair at their kitchen island, his carefully constructed narrative collapsing around him. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The business demands, the investors, the market volatility. I needed options, backup plans. You needed to steal from your wife. I needed to protect what I'd built. Everything I've accomplished could disappear overnight if the wrong people started asking questions. What wrong people? Graham was quiet for a long moment, and Ava realized she was seeing him without his mask for the first time in their marriage. Not the charming entrepreneur or the reasonable husband, but a frightened man who'd gotten in over his head. Some of my early investors weren't entirely legitimate business people, he said finally. When you're building a startup in cryptocurrency, you don't always have the luxury of being choosy about your funding sources. You're laundering money for criminals. I'm providing financial services to clients who value privacy. That's the same thing, Graham. It's not. And the distinction could be the difference between a white-collar conviction and something much worse. Ava felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Boston spring weather. Are you saying these people would hurt me? I'm saying they don't like attention. And divorce proceedings create attention. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to betray me. Graham stood up, his composure returning as he shifted back into manipulation mode. Ava, we can still fix this. Drop the asset demands, accept the original settlement, and I'll make sure you're protected. We can both walk away from this marriage and start over, with you keeping $20 million that should be marital assets, with both of us staying alive and out of federal prison. The threat was clear now, wrapped in concern but unmistakably a threat. Graham wasn't just stealing from her, he was trying to make her complicit in covering up crimes that apparently involved dangerous people. I need to think about this, Ava said carefully. Don't think too long. Some situations have expiration dates. That night, after Graham had left for another supposed business trip, Ava called Noelle and asked her to come over immediately. When her friend arrived, Ava poured 2 glasses of wine and explained what she'd learned about the scope of Graham's criminal activities. Jesus Christ, Ava, you're not just dealing with financial fraud anymore. If he's laundering money for organized crime, this is way beyond divorce court. I know, but I can't let him intimidate me into walking away. You can't get yourself killed over marital assets either. Ava sipped her wine, thinking about the choice Graham had presented her. Accept his settlement and become complicit in covering up his crimes, or continue fighting and risk escalating a situation that apparently involved dangerous people. What if there was a third option? She said slowly. What kind of third option? What if we could expose his crimes in a way that protected both of us? Get the evidence to federal authorities so that we're not the ones creating attention, we're just cooperating with an investigation that's already in progress. Noelle set down her wine glass. You want to flip this from a divorce case to a federal case. Make yourself a witness instead of an opponent. Graham thinks he's cornered me. But what if the corner is actually the safest place to be? Explain. If I'm a cooperating witness in a federal investigation, I have protection. If I'm just an ex-wife making accusations in divorce court, I'm a target. Noelle was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. You'd need solid evidence and a federal prosecutor willing to take the case. We have Harper Thomas and her files. We have the financial analysis you've done. We have documentation of the money laundering patterns, and you'd need to be willing to destroy Graham completely. Federal prosecution doesn't leave room for rehabilitation or second chances. Ava thought about the past 6 years of her marriage, about the careful way Graham had constructed his deception, about the investors whose life savings were at risk, about the threats he'd made that evening. He made his choice when he decided to betray me, she said finally. I'm just making mine. The meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez took place on a rainy Thursday morning in May at the federal courthouse in downtown Boston. Ava sat between Patricia Morrison and her new attorney, criminal defense specialist David Chen, while Noelle and Harper Thomas waited in the hallway outside. I want to be clear about what you're proposing, Rodriguez said, reviewing the evidence packets they'd provided. You're alleging that your husband has been operating a cryptocurrency money laundering operation for at least 3 years, involving millions of dollars in illegal transactions. We're providing evidence of suspicious financial patterns and requesting that federal authorities investigate, Patricia corrected. Miss Sinclair is seeking appropriate resolution of her divorce, which requires accurate asset disclosure. Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed prosecutor in his early 40s, wasn't fooled by the diplomatic language. And if our investigation confirms criminal activity, Miss Sinclair would be willing to cooperate as a witness? Miss Sinclair wants to see justice done, David Chen replied. If her husband has been committing federal crimes, she believes the appropriate authorities should be informed. What level of cooperation are we talking about? Ava spoke for the first time since introducing herself. Complete cooperation. Financial records, testimony, whatever you need to build a case. Rodriguez studied her with the evaluative gaze of someone who'd seen dozens of cooperating witnesses over the years. Why now? You've been married to Mr. Carrington for 6 years. Are you claiming you had no knowledge of his business practices? I'm claiming I trusted my husband and didn't scrutinize his financial activities the way I would scrutinize a client's. When he asked for a divorce and offered a settlement that seemed inconsistent with our lifestyle, I began investigating and discovered evidence of money laundering. I discovered evidence of financial patterns that warranted investigation by people with more expertise than I have. Rodriguez appreciated the careful distinction. What kind of timeline are we looking at for your divorce proceedings? The case is currently in extended discovery. We can maintain that status for several months if necessary. It'll be necessary. If we open an investigation, your divorce case becomes secondary to criminal prosecution. You understand that? I understand that criminal activity should take priority over civil disputes. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with the FBI agent who'd been sitting quietly throughout the meeting. We'll need to interview your witnesses and review the evidence in detail. If we decide to move forward, this becomes a federal case with all the complications that entails. What kind of complications? David Chen asked. Media attention, public scrutiny, potential danger if Mr. Carrington's business associates decide that cooperation poses a threat to their interests. Ava had been expecting this warning. What kind of protection is available? That depends on the level of threat and the quality of information you can provide. But I want you to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back. Your husband will know that you've involved federal authorities, and that could escalate the situation significantly. 3 hours later, after Harper Thomas had been interviewed and the financial evidence had been reviewed by FBI forensic accountants, Rodriguez made his decision. We're opening a preliminary investigation. Agent Sarah Martinez will be your primary contact. We'll need complete financial disclosure from both of you, and we'll want to wire Miss Sinclair for any future conversations with her husband. Wire me? If he's involved in money laundering for organized crime, he may make statements that could be useful for prosecution. Are you willing to do that? Ava thought about Graham's threats about his assumption that she would accept his settlement and walk away quietly. Yes, Agent Martinez, a composed woman in her mid-30s with 15 years of financial crimes experience, walked Ava through the technical aspects of the recording equipment. The device was smaller than Ava had expected, easily concealed beneath her clothing and capable of recording hours of conversation. The goal is to get him talking about his business operations, Martinez explained. If he mentions specific transactions, associates, or methods, that's valuable intelligence. But don't push to hard. People who are suspicious of surveillance often test their environment. What should I do if he becomes threatening? End the conversation and contact me immediately. If you feel you're in physical danger, call 911 first, then call me. That evening, Ava returned home to find Graham pacing in their living room, his phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call abruptly when she entered. Where have you been? He demanded. I've been trying to reach you all day. Court meetings, discovery issues. Ava set down her purse, hyper-aware of the recording device taped beneath her blouse. Is everything all right? Everything is not all right. My attorney says your legal team has been asking questions about business entities that have nothing to do with our marriage. If they have nothing to do with our marriage, then they shouldn't be relevant to asset division. Graham's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you looking for, Ava? I'm looking for an honest accounting of our marital assets so we can divide them fairly. Our marital assets are what I told you they were. The rest of my business holdings are separate property. Then proving that should be straightforward. Graham moved closer, and Ava fought the urge to step back. I think you're fishing for something. I think someone has been filling your head with paranoid theories about my business. What kind of theories? The kind that could get us both in serious trouble. Ava maintained steady eye contact. I'm not interested in theories. I'm interested in facts. Here's a fact. There are people who have invested significant money in my business. People who expect discretion and professionalism. If they start thinking that discretion has been compromised, they might take steps to protect their interests. What kind of steps? Graham's smile was cold. The kind that would make our divorce proceedings irrelevant. The threat was explicit, now recorded. On federal equipment. Ava felt a mixture of fear and satisfaction. Fear for her safety. Satisfaction that Graham was providing exactly the kind of evidence prosecutors would need. Are you threatening me, Graham? I'm warning you. There's a difference. Is there? There is if you're smart enough to accept my original settlement offer and stop asking questions that don't have good answers. That night, after Graham had left for another meeting with his mysterious business associates, Ava played the recording for Agent Martinez over the phone. That's exactly what we needed, Martinez said. He's established a pattern of intimidation related to specific business activities. When we arrest him, this recording will help establish that he knew his activities were criminal. When you arrest him, the evidence you've provided, combined with what we've discovered through our own channels, is sufficient for criminal charges. We're looking at money laundering, tax evasion, fraud, and possibly racketeering, if his associates are who we think they are. Ava absorbed this information with mixed emotions. Relief that Graham would face consequences for his crimes, fear about what those consequences might mean for her own safety, and something approaching grief for the death of the marriage she'd thought she had. What happens next? We execute search warrants tomorrow morning. His office, your house, any properties connected to his business entities. You'll need to be somewhere else when that happens. Where should I go? Somewhere public and safe. We'll arrange for protective surveillance until we determine the scope of any threat from his associates. As Ava packed a bag for an extended stay at a hotel, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since Graham had requested their amicable divorce. She'd gone from devoted wife to federal witness, from seeking fair asset division to exposing a criminal enterprise. Her phone buzzed with a text from Noel. Are you sure about this? Once they arrest him, everything changes. Ava typed back. Everything already changed. I just didn't know it yet. The federal agents would come for Graham in the morning. His carefully constructed empire would crumble within hours. The man she'd married would be revealed as a criminal who'd built his success on lies and theft. But as Ava turned off the lights in the home she'd shared with him for 6 years, she felt something unexpected. Not grief or fear, but a quiet sense of justice. Graham had underestimated her, had assumed that her professional commitment to peaceful resolution meant she was weak. He was about to learn the difference between peaceful and powerless. The woman who'd spent years helping others navigate the aftermath of betrayal had become someone else entirely. A woman who refused to be erased, who turned her pain into precision, who understood that sometimes justice required more than mediation. The long goodbye was just beginning. Ava was drinking coffee in the lobby of the Four Seasons when the news broke. She'd been staying at the hotel for 3 days under federal protection, waiting for the arrest warrants to be executed, when her phone buzzed with a CNN alert. Boston Tech CEO arrested in federal money laundering investigation. The accompanying photo showed Graham in handcuffs being led from his downtown office, his face a mask of controlled fury. Federal agents carried boxes of evidence from the CryptoVault headquarters while news cameras captured every moment of his public humiliation. Her phone immediately started ringing. Patricia Morrison, Noel, her siblings Riley and Morgan calling from Seattle where they'd been carefully relocated until the scope of any threat could be assessed. 3 reporters who'd somehow obtained her number despite the FBI's attempts to keep her identity confidential. She let them all go to voicemail except for Agent Martinez. How are you holding up? Martinez asked without preamble. I'm fine. What's the situation? We executed warrants at 6 locations this morning. CryptoVault offices, your house, 3 storage facilities, and a warehouse in Cambridge. We've seized approximately $12 million in cryptocurrency, $15 million in traditional assets, and enough documentation to keep our forensic accountants busy for months. What about Graham? In federal custody. His attorney is pushing for bail, but given the flight risk and international assets, that's unlikely. We also arrested Jessica Martinez and 2 other associates this morning. Ava felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and something approaching grief for the complete destruction of the life she'd thought she was living. What happens now? Media circus for a few days, then the long process of building the prosecution case. You'll need to stay in protective custody until we can assess whether his associates pose a real threat or we're just trying to intimidate you. How long will that take? Honestly, probably months. This case is going to be federal court's problem for at least a year, maybe two. After ending the call, Ava sat in the hotel lobby watching CNN's coverage of her husband's arrest. The reporter described Graham as a rising star in Boston's tech scene whose innovative cryptocurrency platform had attracted millions in investment. There was no mention yet of the money laundering allegations, just the sanitized version. That would protect the ongoing investigation. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is all your fault. You have no idea what you've started. Ava screenshot the message and forwarded it to Agent Martinez, then blocked the number. The threats were apparently going to continue even with Graham in custody. Over the following days, the media attention intensified as details of the federal case began leaking. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story about the brilliant mediator who exposed her own husband's crimes. The Herald speculated about the scope of the money laundering operation. Financial news outlets analyzed the impact on cryptocurrency markets. Ava watched it all from her hotel room, declining every interview request and refusing to comment on the ongoing investigation. Her silence only seemed to increase the media's fascination with her story. You're becoming something of a folk hero, Noelle said during one of their daily check-in calls. Social media is calling you a badass for taking down your criminal husband. I don't feel like a badass. I feel like someone whose entire life turned out to be a lie. Maybe that's what makes you a badass. Most people would have taken the settlement and tried to forget about it. Most people probably wouldn't have married a criminal in the first place. You married someone who became a criminal. There's a difference. Ava wasn't sure she agreed, but she appreciated Noelle's loyalty. The question that haunted her during the long hotel days was how much she should have known, how many signs she'd missed, how complicit her willful ignorance had made her. On the fourth day of media coverage, Derek Halverson called. Her former mentor in family law had been following the news with the sharp attention of someone who understood the legal implications. How are you holding up, Ava? I'm managing. It's surreal. Watching my private life become public entertainment. I can imagine. I wanted to check in because I know this kind of attention can be overwhelming, especially when you're trying to process personal betrayal at the same time. Derek's voice carried the paternal concern that had made him such an effective mentor during her early career. What's your read on the federal case? Solid. They have financial evidence, electronic records, witness testimony, and recordings of Graham making threats. Unless his attorneys can work miracles, he's looking at serious prison time. And your divorce? Technically still pending, though it's become secondary to the criminal proceedings. Once the federal case resolves, we'll have a much clearer picture of assets subject to division. Assuming there are any assets left after restitution and fines, Ava hadn't fully considered this possibility. Graham's wealth might be entirely consumed by the criminal penalties, leaving nothing for division in their divorce. The irony was, sharp she'd fought for fair asset division only to discover that the assets were criminal proceeds that would be forfeited to the government. Derek, can I ask you something? Of course. In all your years of practice, did you ever see a case like this, where one spouse was completely unaware of the other's criminal activity? Derek was quiet for a moment. I've seen cases where spouses claimed ignorance, whether they were truly unaware or just very good at denying what they didn't want to acknowledge. That's harder to determine. Do you think I should have known? I think you're asking the wrong question. The relevant question isn't what you should have known, it's what you did when you found out. And what you did was exactly right. That evening, Ava received an unexpected visitor. Vivian Carrington arrived at the hotel with the imperious bearing of someone accustomed to getting her way, dressed in Chanel and radiating the controlled fury of a woman whose family reputation had been publicly destroyed. I need to speak with you, Vivian announced when Ava met her in the hotel bar. Privately, they found a corner table away from other guests, and Vivian ordered a martini with the precision of someone who'd been drinking them for 40 years. Ava ordered wine and waited for the attack she was certain was coming. My son is not a criminal, Vivian began without preamble. He's a brilliant businessman who may have made some questionable decisions, but he's not the mastermind the federal prosecutors are trying to make him out to be. Mrs. Carrington, I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. I'm not asking you to discuss anything. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that you've destroyed an innocent man's life because you were angry about your divorce. The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Ava studied Graham's mother, noting the careful way she'd crafted the suggestion that Ava's motives were personal rather than principled. What do you want from me? I want you to tell the truth. That this investigation started because you were vindictive about your marriage ending, not because you had legitimate evidence of criminal activity. And if I did that, the family would be grateful, very grateful. The implication was clear money. In exchange for recanting her cooperation with federal authorities, Ava wondered how much the Carrington family was worth, how much they'd be willing to pay to rehabilitate Graham's reputation. Mrs. Carrington, your son threatened me. He told me that his business associates might take steps to protect their interests if I continued investigating his activities. That threat is recorded on federal surveillance equipment. Vivian's composure cracked slightly. Graham was under stress. People say things they don't mean when they're cornered. Do they also launder millions of dollars when they're under stress? You don't understand the pressure he was under. The demands from investors, the complexity of cryptocurrency markets, the regulatory uncertainty. He was trying to build something revolutionary while navigating an impossible business environment. Ava heard echoes of Graham's own justifications in his mother's words. The family had apparently decided that their defense would focus on portraying him as a victim of circumstances rather than acknowledging his criminal choices. Mrs. Carrington, I'm sorry for what this situation has cost your family, but I can't help you rehabilitate your son's reputation by lying about what I discovered. Vivian's eyes hardened. You could have handled this privately. Work things out between yourselves without involving federal authorities. Your son was stealing from me and threatening me when I discovered it. Private resolution wasn't an option. So, you destroyed him instead. I protected myself. The destruction was a consequence of his choices, not mine. Vivian finished her martini and stood to leave. I hope you can live with what you've done to our family. I can live with telling the truth. I'm not sure I could have lived with covering it up. After Vivian left, Ava sat alone in the hotel bar thinking about the conversation. The Carrington family's response to Graham's arrest revealed the same pattern of denial and deflection that had characterized his approach to their marriage. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that Graham was responsible for his own choices. Her phone buzzed with another unknown number. Vivian couldn't convince you? Maybe you need a different kind of persuasion. This time, instead of forwarding the message to Agent Martinez, Ava called her directly. The threats are escalating, she told Martinez. First, it was vague warnings about dangerous associates. Now it's explicit intimidation. We've been monitoring communications, and there's definitely chatter about you among some of Graham's business contacts. Nothing specific yet, but enough to warrant continued protection. How long can this continue? As long as necessary. But Ava, I need you to understand something. The people making these threats aren't necessarily going to stop because Graham is in custody. Some of them have their own reasons for wanting this investigation to go away. What kind of reasons? The kind that involve other criminal enterprises that use Graham's platform for money laundering. Your cooperation with us could expose activities that go far beyond your husband's operation. Ava felt a chill of understanding. She'd thought she was exposing one man's financial crimes, but apparently she'd stumbled into something much larger. Graham's cryptocurrency platform had been a service provider for multiple criminal organizations, and her decision to cooperate with federal authorities threatened all of them. Are you saying I'm in danger from people I've never met? I'm saying we're taking every precaution to keep you safe while we unravel the full scope of this operation. That night, Ava called Riley and Morgan from her hotel room, needing to hear the voices of people who'd known her before she became a federal witness in a money laundering case. How are you holding up, sis? Riley asked. At 28, she was the more emotional of Ava's twin siblings, prone to dramatic responses that Morgan usually tempered with practical analysis. I'm scared, Ava admitted, and angry, and confused about how my life became something from a crime drama. You're also brave as hell, Morgan added, his voice carrying the steady confidence that had made him successful in his engineering career. Most people would have taken the money and walked away. Maybe most people would have been smarter. Maybe most people wouldn't have had the integrity to do what was right when it was hard. Riley's voice was fierce with protective loyalty. Graham chose to be a criminal. You chose to tell the truth. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that. After ending the call, Ava stood at her hotel window looking out at Boston's skyline, thinking about the choice that had brought her to this moment. She'd started this process trying to secure a fair divorce settlement. She'd ended up exposing a criminal enterprise that apparently extended far beyond her marriage. The woman who'd built her career on peaceful resolution had become someone who understood that some conflicts couldn't be mediated away. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive. Some truths were too important to compromise. Graham had underestimated her, had assumed that her preference for harmony meant she was weak. But there was a difference between choosing peace and accepting defeat. There was a difference between avoiding conflict and surrendering to injustice. Tomorrow would bring more media attention, more legal proceedings, more threats from people who wanted her to disappear. But tonight, alone in her hotel room with federal agents stationed in the hallway, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced since Graham had first asked for their divorce. She felt like herself again. The woman who'd been betrayed was finding her way back to the woman who refused to be broken. 6 months after Graham's arrest, the federal courthouse in downtown Boston had become as familiar to Ava as her own office. She'd testified before 3 different grand juries, participated in countless interviews with prosecutors, and watched as the money laundering case expanded to include 12 other defendants across 4 states. The trial itself began on a cold morning in November, with Judge Patricia Henley presiding over what legal observers were calling one of the most significant cryptocurrency fraud cases in federal court history. Ava sat in the witness waiting area, reviewing her testimony notes while Patricia Morrison provided last-minute coaching. "Remember, you're not on trial here," Patricia said. "You're a witness to criminal activity, not a participant in it. The defense is going to try to make this about your marriage, about revenge, about anything except the evidence of money laundering. I understand. Graham's attorney is going to paint you as a scorned wife who fabricated evidence to destroy her husband. Don't let him provoke you into emotional responses. Stick to facts, stick to what you observed, stick to what you documented." Through the window, Ava could see the media circus that had surrounded the trial. News vans, reporters doing live broadcasts, protesters holding signs supporting both Graham and his alleged victims. Her story had become a symbol for different groups: women's rights advocates who saw her as a hero, cryptocurrency enthusiasts who viewed her as an enemy of innovation, financial crime experts who used her case to illustrate the need for stronger regulations. "Miss Sinclair," a court clerk appeared at the door. "They're ready for you." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow seating for media and observers. Ava walked to the witness stand with the same composed professionalism she'd brought to hundreds of mediation sessions, acutely aware that every gesture would be analyzed and reported. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rodriguez led her through her testimony with methodical precision. Her marriage to Graham, the request for divorce, the discovery of financial irregularities, the decision to investigate rather than accept his settlement offer. "What was your emotional state when you began this investigation?" Rodriguez asked. "I was hurt and confused by my husband's request for divorce, but my primary concern was ensuring that our assets were divided fairly." "Did you set out to expose criminal activity?" "I set out to understand why my husband's settlement offer seemed inconsistent with our lifestyle and his apparent wealth." "And what did you discover?" "Evidence of systematic financial deception spanning several years." Rodriguez walked her through the evidence methodically: the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the cryptocurrency transactions that followed money laundering patterns, the transfers of marital assets without her knowledge or consent. "Did you at any point attempt to resolve these issues privately with your husband?" "Yes. I confronted him about the financial inconsistencies and gave him the opportunity to provide honest disclosure." "How did he respond?" "He denied any wrongdoing and suggested that continuing to investigate his business activities could be dangerous for me." "Dangerous how?" "He said his business associates didn't appreciate publicity and might take steps to protect their interests." "Did you interpret that as a threat?" "I interpreted it as a warning that I could be harmed if I continued seeking honest financial disclosure in our divorce." Rodriguez played the recording of Graham's threats, the audio quality crystal clear. In the silent courtroom, Ava watched the jury's faces as they listened to her husband's voice making increasingly explicit warnings about the consequences of her investigation. "After this conversation, did you continue your investigation?" "I contacted federal authorities and offered to cooperate with their investigation into potential financial crimes. Why? Because I realized that what I'd discovered was beyond the scope of a divorce case. This was evidence of federal crimes that affected not just me, but investors and other victims. The cross-examination came from Graham's lead attorney, Marcus Webb, a silver-haired specialist in white-collar defense who commanded fees that suggested Graham still had access to significant resources. Miss Sinclair, isn't it true that you initiated this investigation because you were angry about your husband's request for divorce? Noah initiated the investigation because his settlement offer was inconsistent with my understanding of our financial situation. You felt entitled to more money. I felt entitled to honest disclosure of marital assets. Honest disclosure. That's an interesting phrase from someone who spent months secretly investigating her husband while pretending to cooperate with divorce proceedings. Patricia Morrison objected, but Webb had made his point. He spent the next hour trying to portray Ava as vindictive and deceptive, a woman who'd used her professional skills to construct a false narrative of victimization. Isn't it true, Miss Sinclair, that you hired private investigators and forensic accountants before you had any evidence of criminal activity? I hired professionals to help me understand financial records that my husband had kept hidden from me throughout our marriage. Hidden, or simply managed independently as many spouses do with their business affairs? Hidden. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency wallets that were funded with what should have been marital assets. You say should have been marital assets, but you're not a financial expert, are you? You're a divorce mediator. I'm someone who spent 6 years married to a man who was apparently stealing from me, allegedly stealing from you. The financial records speak for themselves. Webb tried several different approaches suggesting that Ava had misunderstood legitimate business transactions, implying that her cooperation with federal authorities was motivated by revenge, questioning her credibility as a witness who had deceived her own husband about her investigation. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Ava's calm, consistent testimony undermined his attempts to portray her as vindictive or unreliable. Miss Sinclair, if your husband had offered you a larger settlement, would you have pursued this investigation? If my husband had offered honest disclosure of our actual assets, there would have been no need for investigation. That's not what I asked. It's the honest answer to your question. Judge Henley sustained Patricia Morrison's objection before Webb could pursue the line of questioning further, but he'd accomplished his goal of suggesting that Ava's motives were financial rather than principled. When Ava stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, she felt drained but confident that she'd presented the truth clearly and convincingly. The jury had listened attentively, taken notes, and showed no signs of being swayed by the defense's attempts to portray her as vengeful. Harper Thomas testified the following day, providing technical details about the money laundering operation that corroborated Ava's account. Her nervous demeanor and obvious reluctance to testify against her former employer actually strengthened her credibility with the jury. I tried to convince myself that the transactions were legitimate, Harper said, her voice barely audible in the silent courtroom. But the patterns were too consistent, too perfect. Real trading doesn't work like that. What convinced you to preserve evidence and cooperate with authorities? Rodriguez asked. Miss Sinclair contacted me and showed me documents that proved someone outside the company could trace our activities. I realized that if law enforcement was already investigating, my choice was between being a witness or being a defendant. The prosecution rested its case after 6 days of testimony that painted a comprehensive picture of Graham's criminal enterprise. $27 million in laundered money, 12 different criminal organizations using his platform, evidence of tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The defense called character witnesses who testified about Graham's philanthropy and business acumen, expert witnesses who questioned the prosecution's interpretation of cryptocurrency transactions, and former employees who portrayed him as a demanding but honest employer. Graham himself never testified, despite pressure from his legal team. His attorneys apparently concluded that cross-examination would be too risky given the volume of evidence against him. During closing arguments, Rodriguez focused on the systematic nature of Graham's crimes and the harm to victims. This defendant didn't make mistakes or exercise poor judgment, he told the jury. He constructed an elaborate criminal enterprise designed to launder money for organized crime while defrauding his own investors and stealing from his wife. The evidence shows years of careful planning, sophisticated execution, and callous disregard for the people whose lives he destroyed. Webb's closing argument painted Graham as a victim of regulatory uncertainty and prosecutorial overreach. My client is a brilliant entrepreneur who navigated the complex world of cryptocurrency innovation during a period of legal uncertainty. The government has criminalized business practices that were common in the industry, using the benefit of hindsight to prosecute behavior that was considered legitimate when it occurred. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. As the judge read each count, money laundering, conspiracy, wire fraud, tax evasion, Ava watched Graham's face remain impassive, showing no emotion beyond a slight tightening around his eyes. Sentencing was scheduled for February, with Graham facing up to 40 years in federal prison. His assets would be forfeited to pay restitution to victims, leaving nothing for division in their divorce proceedings. As Ava left the courthouse after the verdict, she was surrounded by reporters shouting questions about her reaction, her plans, her feelings about her husband's conviction. She paused on the courthouse steps, looking back at the building where 6 months of her life had been dissected and analyzed. "I'm grateful that justice was served," she said simply. "My hope is that other victims of financial fraud will feel empowered to come forward and seek help." That night, alone in her apartment for the first time in months, Ava poured herself a glass of wine and reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate wife to federal witness to symbol of resilience. The woman who'd built her career on peaceful resolution had learned that some conflicts couldn't be mediated away. Some betrayals required justice rather than forgiveness. Some truths were too important to compromise for the sake of harmony. Graham's conviction had given her something she hadn't expected, not revenge, but validation. Validation that her instincts had been correct, that her investigation had been justified, that her choice to cooperate with federal authorities had been the right one. The trial was over, but the long goodbye was just beginning. There would be appeals, ongoing threats from Graham's former associates, and the slow process of rebuilding a life that had been completely dismantled by betrayal. But tonight, for the first time in almost 2 years, Ava Sinclair felt like she could finally start moving forward instead of just surviving. The call from Graham's attorney came on a Thursday morning in January, 3 weeks before his scheduled sentencing. David Chen answered on Ava's behalf, as had become standard practice. Since the trial ended, he wants to see her, Chen reported after hanging up. Claims he has information about other criminal activities that could be valuable to federal prosecutors. Ava set down her coffee, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied any mention of Graham. She'd been working to rebuild her practice from her new office in Cambridge, taking on carefully selected cases while avoiding the media attention that still followed her story. What kind of information? He wouldn't say, but his attorney suggested it involves criminal organizations that used his platform and might pose ongoing threats to public safety. And the catch? He'll only provide the information if he can deliver it personally to you. Ava considered this development while staring out her office window at the Charles River. In the 3 months since Graham's conviction, she'd refused all requests for contact from him. His letters had been returned unopened, his phone calls blocked, his attempts to communicate through third parties firmly rejected. What does Agent Martinez think? She's interested in the intelligence, but concerned about the psychological manipulation aspect. Graham might be trying to find closure or control the narrative one last time before sentencing, or he might genuinely have information that could protect people from the criminal organizations he was working with. That's possible too. The decision is yours. That evening, Ava called Derek Halverson to discuss the request. Her former mentor had been following her case with the protective concern of someone who understood the toll that extended legal proceedings could take on the participants. "What does your gut tell you?" Derek asked, after she'd explained the situation. "That I don't want to see him. That I've said everything I need to say in court testimony, and I don't owe him anything more. But if he has information that could prevent other people from being victimized, maybe I have an obligation to hear it." Ava, you don't have an obligation to sacrifice your emotional well-being for the possibility that Graham might provide useful information, especially when that information could probably be obtained through other means. Could it though? If he's only willing to talk to me, and if the information could prevent crimes or protect people. Derek was quiet for a moment. What do you think he really wants? Absolution? Or the last word? Or maybe just the chance to see if he can still manipulate me? And if that's what he wants, will you be able to resist giving it to him? The question struck at the heart of Ava's uncertainty. Despite everything Graham had done, despite the evidence of his systematic betrayal and the months of legal proceedings, she couldn't entirely silence the voice that wondered if she could have handled things differently. If there had been a path that didn't lead to his complete destruction. I don't know, she admitted. Then maybe that's your answer. But 3 days later, when Agent Martinez called with additional context about the potential intelligence value, Ava changed her mind. We've identified at least 6 ongoing investigations that could benefit from information about Graham's client base, Martinez explained. Human trafficking, arms dealing, drug distribution, serious crimes with serious victims. If he has actionable intelligence about these organizations, it could save lives. What are the security arrangements? Federal facility, full surveillance, limited time frame. You'd be completely protected, and anything he says would be recorded for potential use in other prosecutions. How long? 1 hour maximum. You can end the meeting at any time if you feel uncomfortable or threatened. Ava agreed to the meeting with the understanding that she was doing it as a public service, not as Graham's ex-wife seeking closure. She would listen to whatever information he had to provide, answer any questions that might help federal authorities, and then walk away from him forever. The federal detention facility in Plymouth was a stark concrete building surrounded by double fencing and guard towers. Ava went through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a small conference room with reinforced windows and monitoring equipment in every corner. Graham entered wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his careful grooming and expensive clothing from their marriage seem like artifacts from another lifetime. At 38, he looked older than his years, his face gaunt and his dark hair showing gray that hadn't been there during their marriage. They sat across from each other at a metal table while federal agents monitored from an adjacent room. For a long moment, neither spoke, each taking the measure of who the other had become. You look good, Graham said finally. Stronger than when I saw you during the trial. What information do you have for federal authorities? Straight to business. I suppose I should have expected that. Graham's smile was tired rather than charming, lacking the confident magnetism that had first attracted her. How have you been, Ava? Really? I'm not here for personal conversation. Your attorney said you have information about criminal organizations. I do. But first, I need you to understand something about what happened between us. I understand everything. I need to understand. You were stealing from me and lying to me for years. You built a criminal enterprise while I believed we were building a marriage. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Ava leaned back in her chair, recognizing the beginning of another manipulation attempt. What's the whole truth, Graham? The whole truth is that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I started CryptoVault, it was a legitimate business. The money laundering began gradually, almost accidentally. Nothing about your operation was accidental. The federal prosecutors proved that you systematically designed a platform for criminal transactions. They proved that I adapted my platform when I realized certain clients were using it for illegal purposes. But they didn't prove intent from the beginning. Ava studied his face, noting the careful way he parsed his admissions. Even now, facing 40 years in prison, Graham was trying to control the narrative of his own culpability. Why does the distinction matter? Because I want you to know that when I married you, I wasn't planning to become a criminal. What happened to us wasn't premeditated betrayal, it was a series of compromises that gradually destroyed everything I cared about, including me, especially you. Graham's voice carried what sounded like genuine regret. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping you away from the business details. I convinced myself that you were happier not knowing. You convinced yourself that you could steal from me without consequences. I convinced myself that I could fix everything before you found out. That I could eliminate the criminal clients, legitimize the business, and rebuild our marriage on honest foundations. Ava felt a familiar anger rising, the same fury that had sustained her through months of investigation and legal proceedings. When were you planning to fix everything? After you'd hidden $50 million in offshore accounts? After you'd built a criminal empire? After you'd destroyed how many lives? I don't know. Maybe never. Maybe I was just telling myself stories to make the guilt bearable. The admission hung between them, more honest than anything he'd said during their marriage. For a moment, Ava glimpsed the man she'd fallen in love with, someone capable of recognizing his own moral failures. Someone who might have chosen differently under other circumstances. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by her awareness of everything he'd done and everything he'd cost her. What information do you have about your criminal clients? Graham pulled out a handwritten list of names, account numbers, and transaction details. 12 different organizations used my platform for money laundering over the past 3 years. I can provide details about their operations, their financial structures, their methods of hiding illegal proceeds. Ava reviewed the list, noting that several names matched ongoing federal investigations that had been mentioned in media reports. Why are you willing to provide this information now? Because some of these people are genuinely dangerous, and they're still operating. Because cooperating might reduce my sentence. And because, he hesitated, because I want you to know that despite everything I did wrong, I'm trying to do something right. You want credit for cleaning up the mess you created. I want forgiveness for the mess I created. The words settled between them like a challenge. Ava realized this was what the meeting had really been about, not intelligence for federal authorities, but Graham's need for absolution from the person he'd wronged most deeply. You want me to forgive you. I want you to understand that I loved you. That everything I did wrong doesn't erase the fact that our marriage meant something to me. It meant so much to you that you spent years lying to me and stealing from me. It meant so much to me that I convinced myself I was protecting you. From what? From knowing who I really was. The response was so unexpectedly honest that Ava felt her anger waver for a moment. But then she remembered the threats, the manipulation, the systematic deception that had characterized their entire relationship. Who you really were was someone who could look me in the eye every day while building a criminal enterprise. Someone who could make love to me while planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. Someone who could threaten me when I discovered what you were doing. Yes, and you want me to forgive that person. I want you to acknowledge that person was also someone who loved you, even if he didn't know how to show it without destroying everything. Ava stood up from the table, recognizing that she'd heard everything she needed to hear. The intelligence information was valuable and would be provided to appropriate authorities. But the personal conversation had revealed exactly what she'd expected: Graham's need to rewrite their history in a way that preserved his image of himself as someone capable of love despite his criminal choices. Graham, our marriage was based on lies. Your love was conditional on my ignorance. Your protection was really control. And your regret now doesn't change any of that. So you can't forgive me. I can accept that you're capable of recognizing your mistakes. I can acknowledge that you probably told yourself stories that made your choices seem reasonable. I can even feel sad about the person you might have been under different circumstances. But you can't forgive me. I can't pretend that your regret erases the harm you caused. I can't give you absolution that you haven't earned. And I can't rebuild trust with someone who proved that his love was compatible with systematic betrayal. Graham nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response but hoped for something different. What if I could undo it all? What if I could give back every dollar, serve my sentence, and start over with complete honesty? Then you'd be someone who learned from his mistakes. But you wouldn't be someone I could trust with my heart, because some things can't be fixed, because some choices reveal character in ways that can't be unchanged. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 6 years of marriage and 2 years of legal warfare settling between them. Finally, Graham spoke again. I'm going to be sentenced to at least 25 years. I'll be 63 when I get out, assuming I get out. Will you ever think of me during those years? I'll think about the lessons you taught me about trust and intuition and the importance of paying attention to what people do rather than what they say. Nothing else? Nothing else. Graham accepted this with a nod that carried no surprise, only resignation. Thank you for coming, for listening to the intelligence information, and for letting me say what I needed to say. Thank you for the information about your criminal clients. I hope it helps law enforcement protect other people. As Ava stood to leave, Graham called her name one last time. Ava, are you happy now? She paused at the door, considering the question seriously. I'm not sure I know what happiness looks like anymore, but I know what integrity feels like, and I know what it means to refuse to be erased. That's enough for now. I hope you find happiness eventually. I hope you find genuine redemption eventually. Not just regret about consequences, but actual understanding of the harm you caused. I'm working on it. Then maybe those 25 years will serve their purpose. Ava left the detention facility feeling emotionally drained but psychologically clearer than she'd felt in months. The conversation had confirmed what she'd suspected, that Graham's primary concern was still his own narrative, his own need for Forgiveness, his own desire to be remembered as someone who'd loved her despite his betrayals, but it had also provided closure of a sort. She'd looked him in the eye and spoken her truth without anger, without bitterness, without the need to wound him in return for the wounds he'd inflicted. She'd been honest about the impossibility of forgiveness without minimizing the reality of his crimes. Most importantly, she'd walked away knowing that the chapter of her life that included Graham Carrington was finally, definitively closed. 2 years after Graham's sentencing to 28 years in federal prison, Ava stood in the renovated brownstone that had once been their marital home, now transformed into the headquarters of Sinclair Mediation Services. The federal government had sold the property at auction after seizing it as a criminal asset, and Ava had been able to purchase it for a fraction of its original value. Every room had been redesigned to erase the memories of her marriage while preserving the architectural integrity of the historic building. The kitchen where Graham had first asked for their divorce was now a conference room for client meetings. The master bedroom where she'd lain awake wondering about his late night phone calls had become her private office, lined with law books and filled with natural light. "It's perfect," said Harper Thomas, now the chief technology officer of Ava's expanded practice. After providing crucial testimony in Graham's trial, Harper had struggled to find employment in Boston's tech sector. Ava had offered her a position developing secure communication systems for high-conflict divorce cases, and Harper had proved invaluable in creating digital tools that protected clients from the kind of financial surveillance that Ava had experienced. "I never thought I'd want to live in this house again," Ava admitted, adjusting the placement of a painting that had once hung in her childhood home. "But it feels different now, like I've reclaimed it from the lies that used to fill it." The transformation of the space reflected the transformation of Ava's professional practice. Sinclair Mediation Services now specialized in high-asset divorces involving potential financial crimes, with a particular focus on protecting victims of economic abuse. Her team included forensic accountants, private investigators, technology specialists, and victim advocates, all working together to ensure that vulnerable spouses weren't outmaneuvered by partners with superior resources. "Miss Sinclair?" Noelle appeared in the doorway, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd just completed a particularly challenging case. The Morrison settlement came through. Full asset disclosure, fair division, and criminal charges filed against the husband for hiding income. "Another victory for the good guys," Harper said, accepting a glass of champagne. "Another family protected from the kind of betrayal I experienced," Ava corrected gently. "That's what matters." As they celebrated the successful resolution of their latest case, Ava reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightened woman who'd discovered her husband's financial deception had evolved into someone who helped other people navigate similar betrayals with greater knowledge and protection than she'd initially possessed. Her phone rang with a call from Judge Miles, who'd become both a professional colleague and something approaching a friend over the years since Graham's trial. "Ava, I wanted to congratulate you on the Morrison case. Word is spreading through the legal community about your approach to these complex financial situations. Thank you, Your Honor. Though I have to credit my team for the technical expertise, false modesty doesn't suit you. You've created something unprecedented, a mediation practice that actively protects victims instead of just processing their surrender." The observation captured something Ava had been thinking about as her practice evolved. Traditional divorce mediation focused on finding compromise between competing interests, but her experience had taught her that some situations required advocacy rather than neutrality. When one spouse had superior resources, hidden information, or criminal intent, mediation could become a tool for perpetuating abuse rather than resolving it. "I've learned that fairness sometimes requires taking sides," she said, "a lesson that serves you well. I also wanted to let you know that I'm recommending you for the State Bar Association's Award for Innovative Practice. Your work has changed how we think about economic abuse in divorce proceedings." After ending the call, Ava walked through her renovated home, thinking about the strange path that had led her from victim to advocate. Every room held memories of discovery and betrayal, but also memories of the strength she'd found when everything familiar had been stripped away. The doorbell rang, and Ava opened it to find Riley and Morgan standing on her front steps, carrying luggage and wearing the excited expressions of siblings planning an ambush. "Surprise," Riley announced. "We decided you needed company for your 2-year anniversary." Anniversary of what? The day you refused to be erased, Morgan said simply. The day you decided to fight back instead of disappearing quietly. They'd flown in from Seattle without warning, as had become their tradition for marking significant moments in Ava's recovery. The twin siblings who'd been raised by their older sister after their parents' death understood better than anyone the importance of chosen family and deliberate celebration. Have you heard from him recently? Riley asked that evening as they shared dinner in Ava's renovated kitchen. His mother sends occasional updates through my attorney. He's apparently teaching literacy classes in prison and working on some kind of memoir about financial crime. Still trying to control his narrative, Morgan observed. Still trying to find meaning in his consequences, Ava corrected. I hope he succeeds. Not for his sake, but for the sake of anyone who might learn from his mistakes. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken his settlement offer? Ava considered the question seriously. I'd be $2 million richer and haunted by the knowledge that I'd helped cover up crimes that harmed other people. I'd probably be in therapy trying to rebuild my sense of self-worth instead of building a practice that gives my experiences purpose. Any regrets? About exposing his crimes? None. About the marriage itself? She paused, searching for honesty rather than easy answers. I regret that I was naive enough to think love was sufficient protection against betrayal. I regret that I didn't trust my instincts earlier. I regret that other people were harmed by his activities while I was living in ignorant comfort, but not about fighting back, never about fighting back. Later that evening, Ava received an unexpected visitor. Vivian Carrington arrived without advance notice, looking older and more fragile than she had during their confrontation at the hotel bar 2 years earlier. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, Vivian said, accepting Ava's reluctant invitation to come inside. I wanted to see what you'd done with the house. They sat in the living room that had once hosted dinner parties where Graham had charmed investors and clients, now furnished with comfortable chairs and family photographs that told the story of Ava's real life rather than the performance she'd unknowingly participated in during her marriage. It's beautiful, Vivian said quietly. Peaceful. Nothing like what it was before. Thank you. Can I ask why you're here? Vivian was quiet for a moment, studying the family photographs on Ava's mantelpiece. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you during the trial, for trying to convince you to lie to protect Graham. You were protecting your son. I understand that impulse. I was protecting my image of my son. There's a difference. Vivian's voice carried a weariness that suggested she'd spent considerable time examining her own choices. I've had 2 years to read the evidence, to understand what he really did, to accept that the person I raised was capable of systematic cruelty. That must have been difficult. It was devastating. But it was also necessary. Vivian met Ava's eyes directly for the first time since entering the house. I wanted you to know that you were right to expose him, that you protected people I didn't even know existed, that your courage probably prevented other families from being destroyed the way yours was. The apology was unexpected and more meaningful than Ava had anticipated. I appreciate you saying that. I also wanted to ask if you'd consider visiting him. Ava felt her defenses rise immediately. Mrs. Carrington, I've already said everything I need to say to Graham. Not for his sake, for yours. Vivian leaned forward slightly. He's different now. The manipulation, the charm, the elaborate justifications, they're gone. What's left is someone who understands what he destroyed and why he can never get it back. And you think seeing that person would benefit me somehow? I think seeing that person might give you the closure that your conversation at the detention facility didn't provide. Not forgiveness, I understand why that's impossible, but perhaps finality. Ava considered the suggestion while studying Graham's mother, trying to determine if this was another manipulation attempt or a genuine belief that contact might serve some therapeutic purpose. Has he asked you to make this request? He doesn't? No, I'm here. This is my idea. Based on my observation of both of you over the past 2 years, what have you observed? That he's finally become someone capable of genuine remorse, and that you're someone who deserves to see that transformation not for his benefit, but for your own. That night, after Vivian had left and Riley and Morgan had settled into the guest rooms, Ava sat in her home office thinking about the unexpected request. She'd built her new life on the foundation of complete separation from Graham and everything he represented. Her healing had required refusing to engage with his attempts at contact, his letters seeking forgiveness, his need for her to witness his supposed rehabilitation. But Vivian's suggestion raised a different possibility that seeing Graham's genuine transformation might provide something she hadn't realized she needed. Not reconciliation or forgiveness, but the knowledge that his consequences had produced actual change rather than just strategic regret. She called Derek Halverson the next morning to discuss the idea. "What does your instinct tell you?" Derek asked, as he had during their conversation about the original meeting. "That I don't need his redemption to complete my own healing. That I've already found closure through building something meaningful from the wreckage of our marriage. But maybe seeing genuine change would be different from seeing manipulation. Maybe it would confirm that justice actually works sometimes, that consequences can produce real transformation rather than just bitterness. And if he hasn't actually changed, if this is just another performance designed to elicit sympathy, then I'll recognize it immediately, because I've learned to see through his performances. And I'll walk away knowing that some people never change, which is also valuable information. What would you hope to gain from such a visit?" Ava considered the question carefully. Confirmation that my choice to expose him served a purpose beyond protecting myself. That the person who caused so much harm became someone capable of understanding that harm. That the justice system occasionally produces genuine rehabilitation rather than just punishment. And if you don't get that confirmation, then I'll know that too, and I'll stop wondering. 3 weeks later, Ava returned to the federal prison in Plymouth, this time as a voluntary visitor rather than a witness providing intelligence. The security procedures were the same, but her emotional state was entirely different. She felt calm, centered, and completely in control of the interaction. Graham entered the visiting room looking genuinely surprised to see her. 2 years of incarceration had aged him considerably. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with fatigue and something that might have been wisdom. "Ava, I didn't expect. Why are you here? Your mother suggested that you'd changed in ways that might be worth witnessing." They sat across from each other at a different table in a different room, but the dynamic felt fundamentally altered from their previous meeting. Graham's desperate need for forgiveness had been replaced by something calmer, more accepting. "I have changed, but not in ways that erase what I did to you. Tell me how you've changed." I stopped lying to myself about my motivations, stopped constructing elaborate justifications for my choices, stopped believing that my regret somehow balanced the harm I caused. Graham's voice was quieter than she remembered, lacking the performative quality that had characterized most of their conversations during their marriage. "What do you believe now? That I was someone who chose cruelty over honesty because I thought I was smart enough to avoid consequences. That I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too cowardly to be worthy of it. That the person you married was capable of systematic betrayal, and that person was who I really was." The admission was starker and more honest than anything he'd said during their previous meeting. Ava studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had characterized their entire relationship, but found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine self-knowledge. "Do you still want my forgiveness? I want you to know that I understand why it's impossible. That I've stopped believing I deserve it, or that you owe it to me. What do you want then? I want you to know that exposing my crimes was the right choice. That the people who've been convicted based on the intelligence I provided deserve to be stopped. That the victims who've been identified deserve justice. I already knew those things. I want you to know that becoming someone capable of genuine remorse has been the only meaningful accomplishment of my adult life." Ava absorbed this statement, recognizing its significance. During their marriage, Graham had measured his worth through external achievements, business success, social status, financial accumulation. For him to identify internal change as his primary accomplishment represented a fundamental shift in values. What does genuine remorse look like in practice? Teaching literacy to other inmates, providing ongoing cooperation to federal authorities investigating financial crimes, writing detailed documentation of money laundering techniques so law enforcement can identify similar operations, accepting that I'll probably die in prison and finding purpose in that reality rather than fighting it. And personally, accepting that the harm I caused you is permanent, that your choice to build a new life without any connection to me is appropriate and necessary, that loving someone means wanting their happiness even when you can't be part of it. The conversation continued for another hour, covering Graham's work with other inmates, his cooperation with ongoing federal investigations, and his plans for the remaining decades of his sentence. Throughout the discussion, Ava found herself recognizing someone genuinely different from the man she'd married, not just older or more regretful, but fundamentally altered in his understanding of responsibility, consequence, and the nature of genuine love. Ava, can I ask you something? Yes. Are you happy? Really happy? Not just successful or strong or rebuilt, but actually happy. The question caught her off guard with its genuine concern for her welfare rather than its implications for his own narrative. Yes, I think I am, or at least I'm becoming happy. Building my practice, helping other people avoid what I experienced, creating something meaningful from the worst experience of my life. It feels like purpose rather than just survival. I'm glad. You deserve happiness after everything I put you through. Graham, I need you to understand something. I didn't come here to give you absolution or to confirm your rehabilitation for your own peace of mind. I know. I came here to see if justice had actually worked. If the consequences you faced had produced genuine change or just strategic adaptation. And what's your assessment? Ava studied his face one final time, looking for any trace of the manipulative charm that had once defined him. I think you've become someone capable of genuine remorse and actual responsibility. I think the person who could systematically betray someone he claimed to love has been replaced by someone who understands the weight of that betrayal. Thank you. But I also think that change, while meaningful, doesn't create any obligation for me to reestablish contact or provide ongoing validation of your transformation. I understand. This is goodbye, Graham. Real goodbye this time. Not the performance we went through when you asked for our divorce, but actual closure. I understand, he repeated. And Ava, thank you for giving me the chance to become someone worthy of your contempt rather than your pity. The observation was so unexpectedly insightful that Ava almost smiled. Take care of yourself. Use the rest of your time to continue becoming someone better. I will, and you continue being someone extraordinary. As Ava left the prison for the final time, she felt the satisfaction of genuine closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the knowledge that justice had served its purpose. Graham had been held accountable for his crimes, had faced consequences that produced actual change, and had become someone capable of understanding the harm he'd caused without expecting absolution for acknowledging it. More importantly, she'd confirmed her own strength and judgment. The woman who'd been betrayed had become someone who could face her betrayer from a position of complete emotional independence, could assess his transformation without being manipulated by it, and could walk away knowing that her choice to expose his crimes had served its intended purpose. 6 months later, Ava hosted a dinner party in her renovated home to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Sinclair Mediation Services. The guest list included the people who'd supported her transformation from victim to advocate: Noel, Harper, Judge Miles, Derek Halverson, Patricia Morrison, Agent Martinez, Riley, Morgan, and several clients whose cases had ended in successful protection from financial abuse. I want to propose a toast, Judge Miles said, raising his glass as the group gathered in the dining room that had once hosted Graham's business entertaining. To Ava Sinclair, who proved that strength doesn't require cruelty, that justice doesn't require vengeance, and that the best response to betrayal is building something beautiful from the wreckage. To second chances earned through integrity, Derek added. To refusing to be erased, Noel contributed. To turning survival into service, Harper said quietly. As they raised their glasses, Ava looked around the table at the people who'd helped her rebuild her life and create something meaningful from her experience of betrayal. The frightened woman who'd discovered her husband's crimes had become someone who protected other people from similar destruction. The victim had become an advocate. The survivor had become a guide. To the long goodbye, Ava said finally. To learning that some endings are actually beginnings, that some losses create space for better things, and that the strongest response to betrayal is refusing to let it define you. They drank to new beginnings born from necessary endings, too. Justice that served healing rather than revenge, and to the quiet strength of people who chose to build rather than destroy when faced with life's cruelest surprises. Later that evening, after her guests had left and the house had returned to its peaceful silence, Ava sat in her home office working on a case that would help another woman escape financial abuse with her dignity and security intact. The work felt like purpose, like the natural evolution of everything she'd learned about betrayal, survival, and the slow process of rebuilding trust in a world that had proven capable of extraordinary cruelty and unexpected grace. Outside her, window, Boston's lights sparkled against the darkness, a city full of people facing their own versions of loss and discovery, betrayal and healing. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to turn hard-won wisdom into protection for others. But tonight, Ava Sinclair was exactly where she belonged, in a home reclaimed from lies, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with truth, working to ensure that other people's stories of betrayal might end in justice rather than defeat. The long goodbye was finally complete. What remained was the life she'd built in its aftermath, not the life she'd planned, but the life she'd earned through refusing to surrender to someone else's cruelty. It was enough. It was everything. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.